Hello, hello, and welcome to this week's Capitol View webcast. This is where we discuss on Monday afternoons what's going on in the state capitol with Daily Journal Capitol correspondent Bobby Harrison, and we are back for another lively discussion. Bobby, how's it going today?
All right, Chris, how you doing?
Good, doing well. I know, a couple of issues to talk about this week. We want to talk toward the end a little bit about the state auditor's office and the Mississippi Department of Education and kind of, what happened there at the end of the week. But first, an interesting poll that came out last week by Millsaps College in Jackson, and looking at some of the issues that are most important to debaters are most important to voters going into the 2019 election. And there were some surprises that came out of that, right, Bobby?
Yeah, there sure was, Chris. It was a poll by the political science department at Millsaps done by Chisholm Strategies, which is a Mississippi-based polling company operated by Brad Chisholm. And there were several interesting results in that poll. The poll focused a lot on public education, but it also sort of delved into the potential horse race for governor, if you will. Horse race, maybe seem like not a appropriate term, but in terms of a horse race for the candidates for governor, it delved into that. Tate Reeves versus Jim Hood, and it focused on the issues related to transportation. So it covered a lot of ground and provided some interesting data for the candidates and legislators going not only to the 2019 statewide elections, but also going to the 2018 session for the issues that legislators might be taking up.
Yeah, so one of the big issues, I guess, one of the biggest talking points, I know what you focused on in your original story about the poll, was the support that voters had for the need to repair roads and bridges in the state. That's been a big issue. We've talked about it a lot here on Capitol View before. You've written a lot about it. And it's always been said that it's something that everyone agrees needs to be done, but they can't figure out how to do it. This poll adds more weight to the fact that it's an important issue to Mississippians.
Yeah, it was a number one legislative priority, or not just number one issue that the poll respondents said the state's political leadership should address the state's road and bridge repairs and the condition of those, just the general condition of transportation infrastructure throughout the state. And what the poll didn't do, and it was kind of and there was nobody's fault. The poll did not specifically ask how do you address that issue. What the poll did do was ask how people felt about increasing the road and gas tax, the gasoline tax, and by an overwhelming majority of people were against that. But the question was related to raising the gasoline tax, not for road and bridge needs, but for education needs. So it was kind of misleading to a certain extent. And the respondents overwhelmingly didn't want to increase the gasoline tax for education needs, but it wasn't clear whether they would want to address raise the gasoline tax for road and bridge needs. Now, extrapolating that out a little bit, the Mississippi Economic Council, which has been the leading proponent of doing something about the state's road and bridges, they've done several polls, and all those polls show a majority of the voters wanting to increase taxes for infrastructure improvements. Now, what's not spelled out in those polls either is whether that be the gasoline tax. But of course, we're talking about like this because the gasoline tax is the current gasoline tax, which is 18.4 cents per gallon, is the primary source of state funds for transportation needs. Now, the problem is that 18.4 cents per gallon tax is one of the lowest in the nation, and it's just not generating enough revenue to deal with all the state's transportation needs. So the issue is whether voters would want to raise that tax for transportation needs. Now, taking that one step farther, it doesn't seem that there's consensus in the legislature to do that, regardless of what the polls may say. And as a matter of fact, Scott Waller, the interim president of the Mississippi Economic Council, said they're going to start looking for other solutions, other sources of revenue to deal with the transportation needs. And he seems like he's kind of writing off the gasoline tax as a way to do that. So, but we just have to see what comes up in the 2019 session.
Yeah, so speaking on the gasoline tax, and you had a follow-up story. So I guess this initial story about the poll, I believe, was someday late last week, Thursday or Friday. You had a follow-up in Sunday's Daily Journal, looking at the fact that what the poll said is 72% of Mississippians did not support increasing the tax on gasoline. But as you said, when you drill down to it, it was specifically saying they don't support an increase on the gasoline tax to support more money for education. And so, you could read two things into that. What that you could say, A, they don't support a tax on gasoline, or you could say that they feel that if you are going to support the tax, it should go toward the roads and not for education. And that's
that's
kind
of
what your
logical
Sunday
place
story
for it
got
to
into
go.
a little bit. Right.
Yeah.
Looking, I guess, down at some of the other issues that to that question specifically in terms of what voters saw as priorities, reducing the size of the state government. So it was 27%, first of all, that supported fixing roads and bridges. 15.9% said reducing the size of the state government. And then you had several others that were right around 14%. That was more funding for public schools, improving access to health care, and providing more financial incentives to companies that create jobs. I mean, that's all pretty standard, I guess. Probably nothing that really surprised you about any of those numbers, Bobby.
No, what was kind of surprising though, if you look way on down, I think it's 6%, 5 or 6% felt that addressing social issues and would be a priority. Of course, the legislature has spent a lot of time in the past few years passing conservative legislation to deal with everything from gay marriage to several other issues. So, and that doesn't seem to be a priority for the voters statewide based on that poll. And what was also interesting in the poll, Chris, the poll really focused on education, and I think it shows the majority felt that the state was not spending enough money on public education. And while the majority, the respondents in the poll did not believe that the gasoline tax should be spent to improve education, they did majorities, or not majority, but strong pluralities did feel that did support raising either the personal income tax or the corporate taxes to provide more money for education. And of course, that's interesting because in the past few years, both there's been several tax cuts for corporations and also a cut in the personal income tax, and the voters are saying something completely different. Like, they're saying those taxes should be raised to pay for to provide more money for public education. So those were some interesting results in the poll also.
Yeah, let me get those numbers real quick. It was the support of the increase in the income tax was 44% to 41% supported increasing the income tax, and 46% to 41% supported increasing the corporate tax. The other thing that got an even overwhelming majority was the lottery, which is another issue that has been talked about a lot. 73% to 23, 73 to 23 supported increasing the lottery for money for education.
And of course, Mississippi is one of, I think, 6 states that don't have a lottery nationwide, and currently, the House Speaker has a committee formed to look at the issues surrounding enacting a lottery, and there's some thought that might be an issue also during the 2018 session.
Bobby, backing up from this a little bit, you said earlier when we were talking specifically about the gas tax, and you basically said, regardless of what the poll says, there doesn't seem to be much appetite in the legislature to do that. So it may be a moot point. I guess my question is, how much weight do you think this poll will carry looking ahead to the legislature? Do you think this is something that they'll look at these numbers and might influence policy, or is this just kind of a side piece that won't really have much impact a month or two from now?
I don't know, Chris. It seems that the minds are kind of made up on the gasoline tax. I mean, you got, Tate Reeves running for governor in he's lieutenant governor, and he's running for governor in 2019. At least that's the conventional wisdom. He's done nothing to dispel that. Running for governor, he's being praised for by various conservative groups for blocking efforts to increase the gasoline tax. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I do think that there's going to be there will be tremendous pressure on legislative leadership to do something about roads and bridge needs. So we'll just have to see what they come up with. Right now, that doesn't seem to be any type of consensus. I mean, and the only thing I think there would be a consensus on at this point in the process is providing a modest amount of bond money for transportation needs. So, but we'll see what the MEC comes up with, and if there's something that you got to have. First thing you got to do is have Reeves in the Senate as Lieutenant Governor and House Speaker Philip Gunn kind of on the same page to get something done on this issue. And so far, they haven't been able to be on the same page on this issue.
Another issue that the poll touched on, and you mentioned Reeves as a gubernatorial candidate, and you kind of hinted at this a little bit at the beginning, but it talked about the approval rating for both the current governor, Phil Bryant, and who's perceived to be the top two candidates running for governor next year, in 2019, which are Reeves and on the Democratic side, Attorney General Jim Hood. Those numbers, I guess specifically the gubernatorial ones, were kind of interesting. So we'll start. Bryant had a 54% approval rating compared to a 32% disapproval. Reeves was kind of low on both sides, 38% approval to 32% disapproval. And then Jim Hood, again, who's the only statewide Democrat to hold office right now, or only Democrat to hold statewide office, had a 52% approval rating and only 25% disapproval. What do you take from those numbers, Bobby?
Well, I mean, they were good numbers for Hood. I mean, his net approval rating was actually higher than incumbent Governor Phil Bryant. So this is one poll, one snapshot, and we just have to see what other polls say going forward. But this was a really strong poll for Jim Hood, who is the only statewide elected Democrat, as you said, and is kind of dipping his toes into the gubernatorial campaign waters. Most people believe he's going to run for governor this time around, but a lot of people thought he was going to run for governor back in 2015 too, and he didn't then. So we just have to see. But to me, Chris, the most interesting number in that poll that was kind of buried deep down in it was they asked for favorability ratings by region and region of the state, and Hood's strongest region of the state, as far as he was most favorable by a 50-point, I think, net approval rating in Northeast Mississippi, which is, of course, he's from Northeast Mississippi. He's a Chickasaw County native and still lives in Chickasaw County. So those are very strong numbers from him, and it's kind of been my sort of just real general principle that the Democrats gonna do well in in the Delta area and in parts of Metro Jackson, where there's a lot of Democratic votes. But for the Democrat to win, he has to do well in another area of the state. It used to be that area was viewed to be Northeast Mississippi. It was kind of a swing area. Now, in recent elections, Northeast Mississippi has become this strong region for Republicans. But if Hood does well in Northeast Mississippi and does as well as Democrats traditionally do in those other areas like the Delta and Jackson area and a couple other areas, and he'd be a real strong candidate for governor. And at this point in time, as the poll indicates, and I think there's anecdotal evidence to support this, Lieutenant Governor Reeves has a few. I mean, there's nothing that he can't overcome, but he has a few issues with his favorability ratings, and he just based on that, this gubernatorial election could be more competitive than people might have first thought. Republicans have won handily for governor since recent elections, so this could be the most competitive race in 3 or 4 elections for governor.
Bobby, you mentioned that people have thought of Hood as a candidate for governor before, and he hasn't run, and obviously neither he nor Reeves has officially jumped into the race yet, and it's still a good bit away. It's still 2 years away. Are you seeing any indications, though? I mean, Reeves, I would say it's probably a safe bet that he's going to run. But are you seeing any any little indications that Hood is maybe starting to lean that direction more, or it's still just really hard to say?
Well, I mean, he's talking about it. He talks about issues that would come up in a gubernatorial campaign, he talks about the transportation needs, which is turned out to be a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
He's even talked about the lottery. He said that as a Baptist, he opposes the lottery in principle, but he said that it may be the only source of revenue that, new revenue that can get through the legislature. So he's kind of come out in support of the lottery. So he sounded more and more like a gubernatorial candidate. He's been, both he and Reeves have run 4 statewide elections, and they won all 4. So they're both well known throughout the state, or about as well known as a candidate can be running for governor for the first time. So he's by far. As far as on the Democratic side, there's Jim Hood as a potential candidate, and then there's not anybody else near his name identification statewide on the Democratic side. If for some unforeseen reason that Tate Reeves didn't run, of course everybody thinks he's going to run, and that's probably about the safest bet in politics in Mississippi right now, that he will be a candidate for governor. But he didn't run. You could have several candidates who could step in and with some strong name identification, such as Secretary of State Delbert Hosemann, or even Treasurer Lynn Fitch. So there's just more options on the Republican side if the front runner doesn't run. But I think if I had to bet right now, I'd put money on Jim Hood running for governor.
Probably before we wrap up, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the events last week between the state auditor's office and the Mississippi Department of Education. Essentially, I guess there was a peer report that came out toward the middle of the week that questioned some contracts that MDE had awarded. Some of the people who got contracts were people who State Superintendent Carrie Wright had worked with previously in her school district in Maryland before she came down to Mississippi. And there was some question about that. There's limits that if a contract is above a certain amount, in this case, $100,000, it has to be bid in some of these contracts. And then if it's over $50,000, you have to get multiple quotes. In these, they were just coming in just under the threshold for both of those. And the debate was whether those contracts have been split into several small contracts instead of one large one to be able to avoid that rule. Then I guess it was Friday, the auditor's office came out following up on that and was critical of the MDE for its accounting practices in this case. And MDE defended itself. And I know you kind of went to the press conferences and whatnot. Walk us through that and kind of your take on what's going on there.
Yeah, Chris, it's a complicated issue, and there's a lot of moving parts on it. But there was that peer report, as you mentioned, which peer is the sort of the legislative watchdog committee that the legislature goes to peer and says, I think there's some problems with this agency. Would you look at that? And the peer report was very critical of the Department of Education, and then the auditor's office has been working on a audit for over a year now, and it just by happenstance, I guess, on the same week that report is released, and it was really hard on MDE. And there's a couple of issues. The contract issue, essentially, there's 4 different sets of contracts involving different things, and as you said, under state law, not getting into specifics, but it was over a set amount. The State Department of Education is supposed to go through a procurement board and get bids, and the contracts did not. One contract didn't exceed that amount, but what it looks like is that MDE awarded to multiple contracts to the same agency or same person. And the multiple contracts, each individual contract within those multiple contracts was below that threshold. But if you put those if you add those contracts together, they were significantly above that threshold. Now, what Carrie Wright, who is the state superintendent, and her spokespeople said these contracts were different. They were for different things, and it's hard to see from a layperson's perspective, but they were for different. They were for different elements, different jobs at the State Department of Education. So we'll just have to see how that plays out. But there was other issues within the audit department's findings. probably the most troublesome among those was it appears that there were some contracts awarded for goods and services, and there was not adequate paperwork done to show where the State Department of Education received those goods and services. So there's not, in some instances, there may not be proof that the state actually got what it was paying for with the contract. So this thing is far from over. I think the investigation is going to continue. I'm not saying that there's any intentional wrongdoing. Reaches the office of the superintendent. The State Department of Education is a big agency, and apparently some of these contracts were awarded without maybe even the knowledge of the state superintendent. So we'll just have to see where it goes. But I think this investigation is going to continue, and we'll be hearing a lot more about it. One thing that Stacy Picker and the state auditor did stress was that the State Board of Education, which is the governing authority that oversees the State Department of Education, that it needs to provide more oversight of this contracting process. And so we'll see how that goes in the future also.
And the indication I got from Stacy Picker and the state auditor is that there could be more to come, more findings, more holding more people accountable and for whatnot as this continues. Is that right? Like you said, this is an evolving process.
That it may actually involve, not only, some of this stuff, especially as it relates to not being able to document receiving the goods and services that the contracts were awarded for, that this may become a law enforcement issue. We'll just have to see if that happens. But, I think at one point he said, that when it gets to matters involving law enforcement, he doesn't comment on that. So he left that door open. So we'll see how that plays out in the next several months. I would imagine.
Sure. So there'll obviously be plenty more to look at there, and Bobby will have coverage of that. You'll be able to follow it in the Daily Journal and at djournal.com, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more on Capitol View going ahead. Thanks, Bobby, for joining us again this week. Thank you for watching, and remember, you can catch Capitol View every Monday, 2 o'clock at djournal.com. Thanks, and have a great week.